And it's an issue that people continue to talk about. I'm bringing in, I would say, two experts here. Matthew Wilk, who is involved in helping parents and school boards, and Bree Mogenberg, you are from Mount Pleasant. Introduce yourself. Let me start with Bree real quick. Just a quick introduction of who you are for people who are watching. Who are you?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Well, Bree Mogenberg, for folks that don't know, local activist here in Mount Pleasant. Also a state committee woman for the Michigan Republican Party. And, honestly, since COVID, I think most parents have really got involved, but it's been a good 4 years where I've really started to pay attention to the policies locally and making sure that parents have a voice in the community and with their children.
Okay, and Matthew, we've talked before about school board issues and different things, but and you're doing a lot now. Who are you? For those of you who don't know, you
I,
used to be on a school board, correct?
I'm the president and founder. I'm an attorney and president and founder of something called Get Kids Back to School. We're a 501c4 that works with school board members and people who want to run and parents and activists. And we've kind of taken a leading role on the Title IX issue in the state of Michigan.
Okay, Bree, I saw this week that I believe it both of you or just you filed this. Bree, who filed this? What we're about to talk about?
Well, I think there was a joint effort, definitely there. Was filed with my name on it.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
gonna put it up on the screen right here, and people won't be able to read it, but here it is. So this has been officially filed. You filed this with the United States Department of Education, correct?
Yes, that's
Yes,
correct.
with the Office of Civil Rights.
Right.
Okay, Bree first, and then I'll get to Matthew. Bree, explain this in your terms, and then I'll get to the little legal part of it with Matthew. But what is this?
In a nutshell, without all the legalities, there's a policy that Mount Pleasant Public Schools still has, unless they've since rescinded it, that I'm not aware of. But the policy 5106, it refers to transgender students and non-discrimination. But within that policy, it still allows those students to use the facilities that they choose. The policy also directly references Title IX and a few of the other policies that also directly reference Title IX. Now, this was brought to the attention of the school board back in February when they addressed the Title IX policies. They did not put it on the agenda at that time. They didn't respond to the request to put it on the agenda. I went to the school board meeting. I brought it up at that time as well. Ironically, that video has still not been published. Their ones before and after have been. But because I didn't get a response from them, I did what I said I was going to do, and I filed a complaint.
Okay, and Matt, what is this complaint goes to the Department of Education? Is it a complaint? Is it a request? Where does this go from there? Who sees it? What could happen because of this?
Okay, so the Department of Education is primarily responsible for enforcing Title IX of the Higher Education Act. They do the Higher Education Act. Title IX is just one of them.
Okay.
And when you have a complaint that the provisions of Title IX are not being complied with, the first step you take is not to go to a lawsuit, is you let the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education, and this is federal, know what's going on. This one is relatively simple. The Title IX requires that women's spaces, young women's spaces, be protected. The statute, the regulations that are underlying the statute that are put out by the Department of Justice lay out each individual section, things like bathrooms, things like sports. Was relatively rare in the state. There were 4 filed. I think there are a total of 13 that are sort of working their way through the system, where the state has an explicit policy, when the board has an explicit policy that says, hey, if a boy with gender dysphoria walks in and says, I am now a girl, they, without any further review or discussion, get to use the women's facilities. That is not the intention of Title IX. And the example I give is really simple as this. Could a school district, if it wanted to, create a basketball team? We're just going to have a basketball team.
Okay.
One, made the best 12 people win. They could not. It would be all boys. Right? Boys are taller, boys run faster, boys jump higher. Look, I have a boy and a girl. It would be all boys.
Yeah.
Could they do that? They cannot. Why can't they? What law tells them they can't do that? Title IX tells them they can't do that. Title IX says, it does, and it's not in form of equal opportunity. Some people use that wrong. It's there's a understanding that women have separate facilities all throughout, not only the document itself, Title IX of the Higher Education Act, but the regulations that have been promulgated for for decades under Title IX.
Okay, Title IX, I mean 1972.
72?
So Title IX was implemented Congress, correct? Of
Correct.
lawmakers.
It is a congressional act. I think it's, you head up on the board, I think it's 16 USC 1681 or something like that. It's on the board.
Yeah.
It is an act of Congress. That is correct.
And over the years, some people would ask, and maybe it's a stupid question then, why has it changed? Because Congress hasn't changed anything. So how does it change? And you explained this before we started recording. But yeah, do different administrations make different orders or interpret it differently?
Yes, they can. So what happens is the statute itself will say something like, and a lot of government statutes have this, it says something like, the Secretary of Education or whichever, and actually under this one, it would be the Secretary of Health and Human Services, because the Department of Education didn't exist in 1972. The Secretary shall make rules and regulations to enforce these laws, period. And so it's a punt from Congress to the executive branch. Now, prior to last year, there was sort of a court standard that said we're going to be very deferential to the executive branch when those interpretations are made, and unless it's crazy, we're not going to overturn it. That was a standard called Chevron deference, and it was in place for a long time. It kind of rode it over years and officially had its death knell last year in a case called Loper Bright, where they said, we're not doing it anymore. Courts get to look and say, is that a rule that is what was intended originally and an original intent of the statute? So in 2024, the Joe Biden administration had their executive order grant issued that said a boy with gender dysphoria is a girl for purposes of Title IX. And multiple courts threw that out. So now you're sort of back to where you were before, but where you were before, the whole point of it was to protect girls' rights.
Okay. And yeah, it's very confusing indeed. But when the Biden, most of the schools they implement. So why now are school districts? Because now the Trump administration, they have their own interpretation. They've changed it, right, as to what.
That's
So,
correct.
but why aren't schools like Mount Pleasant then doing that, or many schools in Michigan? Are
Well,
they?
that's a good question. So in the state of Michigan, we have a Civil Rights Act that was amended in 2023, and it's called the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. It's been around for a long time. I had a discussion with another reporter, and I had to explain to him that Elliott and Larson were two Michigan legislators. It's a Michigan law. And under Michigan law, it says it's very general, and it says you can't discriminate on the basis of gender identity. However, the concept that this somehow overrides a federal law to the contrary is not just wrong, it's really wrong, and it's historically awful. So I was having a conversation, or I spoke before the Plymouth Canton School Board, and Dr. Monica Merritt is on the school board. Dr. Monica Merritt has an issue of fame. The little girl in the movie Remember the Titans is her. The little black girl is her. She is Denzel Washington's daughter. Her dad was the coach who integrated the program in Virginia back in those days. Okay. So back in those days, let's think back to that. The 1950s, the federal government said, you shall integrate schools. It is a federal law. It is a right granted to people all across the country. States, many of them, all of them in the South, said, we have a law to the contrary, and it doesn't matter what you say, federal government. And the end result of that was very, very clear, goes back a long way. It is Article 6, Section 2 of the Constitution, and it says the federal law is the supreme law of the land. So if the federal government grants to you the right, the state government cannot take that right away. And what Bree and I have been talking about is it's not the right of the boy with gender dysphoria. It's the right of the young girl to have a private bathroom, to have a private locker room, and to play in a sport where she's competing against other young girls. That's the right in question. And because a federal statute protects that right, a state statute can't take it away.
Bree, let me ask you, because you may have heard it, and I got a statement from. No, actually, it was this past week. I forget what lawmaker said it. or it was a spokesperson for the Department of Education, or I don't know who said it, but that there were no trans athletes, that this is not an issue because there's not many of those people in Michigan. Some lawmaker said this, that it's being blown out of proportion because it's not an issue in schools. You've probably heard that argument from people that some are making more of it, that some schools don't have this concern. How do you answer that when you hear those people on social media or whatever, when they tell you that? What do you say to them?
Well, so that's really interesting that you bring this up, because there's a couple of points that need to be made with that. Very first off here, 5% now, and this was just released from the CDC. 5% of students and young adults consider themselves to be transgender or able to switch from one sex to the other sex. So 5% of students is not a very minimal number. And I think I heard what you were referencing, like there were only one or two kids that were with the MHSAA that were athletes. But let me ask you, how do they know? Because, right, doesn't state law now protect all of that information from actually being shared? Now, I can speak personally to our school district as well, and even to school board members of Mount Pleasant Public Schools. And transgenderism is very near and dear to their heart because they have loved ones that consider themselves to be transgender. So the number of only one or two students might only be what people recognize, or those that are admitting to be an openly transgender. Again, I go back to 5% with the CDC, and that number in this trans epidemic that we have. How do 5% of students consider themselves to be transgender, and only one or two students are competing? But Dave, let me say this, even if only one or two students are competing, that still doesn't have anything to do with protecting the girls in the facilities, right? I mean, if you've got 50-50 girl and boy, and 5% of those students are transgender, what happens when all those boys start using the girls' bathroom? So it's far beyond just simply competing.
So, Matt, is this going to end up in, because the MHSAA said, well, Elliot Larson. So, is this going to end up, if someone pushes it, in a state court, or can it go beyond a state court, or how's
No,
this all going to sort out? Because the MHSAA, they don't want, they're just saying Elliot Larson. But where's the next step for this?
well, the next step is going to be an investigation by the Office of Civil Rights, which, if you
Okay.
follow what the president had, the discussion he had with the governor of Maine, after a boy with gender dysphoria who competed as a boy in the prior year, competed in the pole vault and won by some number of feet.
Yep.
That issue went viral, I suppose, and the
Yep.
president raised it at a governors association meeting, and the governor of Maine said, "We'll see you in court," and to which Donald Trump says, "Yes, we'll see you in court." But
Okay,
here's how it
that's what he was
works.
talking about. That's the issue he was.
That's the
Okay.
issue he's talking about, and sports are it makes it crystal clear.
Is that
Okay,
a federal court, or state court?
federal court, because you have violated Title IX
Yeah,
of the Higher Education Act.
that makes sense.
Right? But here's the first step that's going to happen. The first step that happens is, as is going on with this district in Maine, you're being investigated for a Title IX violation. And if you have one, you have to stop it. And if you don't stop it, federal funding is cut off.
Oh,
That is a spigot that turns off quickly. And that you're talking about putting a whole bunch of other things at risk because you want to live under the ideology that boys with gender dysphoria can change their gender.
so they don't. So it's not until the investigation over, and it can be cut or limited immediately.
They can send a letter out tomorrow saying, "We've investigated enough. We know this is going on." Generally, what they do is they give you some time to correct your actions, right?
Okay.
You got 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, something like that.
Yeah.
But I want to concentrate a little bit on the sports thing, because for the general public, it makes it pretty clear. All right. So you've got a girls basketball player, and it's really a boy with gender dysphoria. Well, you only play 5 players on the court in basketball. So that person is taking away the right of another girl to be on that court, to be on that team, to get practice time, to get a varsity letter, to play on JV, to get better. That's her right. And that right is being taken away by a boy with gender dysphoria. Now, one thing that the MHSAA said, they didn't say there are only 2 people playing. What they said was there were only 2 waivers sought. There's a difference to prove
Oh,
the
okay.
point.
Okay.
If what if a school didn't seek a waiver? Now, I haven't heard a story about a competitive, it happening in Michigan, the high school basketball or anything like that. Doesn't mean that it isn't happening. Doesn't mean that it's not happening at the middle school where no one's complained. Because frankly, as Bree well knows, the cancel culture is live and well. And if you're out there saying, "Hey, look, I think this is a problem," the first thing you're going to get is 1,000 nasty messages online about how much of a bigot you are. But that's why I like to focus on the
Yeah.
rights of the young girl,
Yeah. Are
right?
what about the attorneys for all these school districts? Is this a tough situation for them, or should it be easy? Because I talked to one superintendent in mid Michigan, and he's like, we're stuck between this and that, and he was scared of being sued on every direction. Is
Oh,
is that
But
reality?
bring that up, Matt.
sure.
So in regards to the attorneys, and Matt, you can piggyback off me here. So I will tell you, Dave, if you were to go look up school board policies
Okay.
for any given school district in Michigan, you're going to see one that says board policies and it's kind of like got a brown writing with a tree. And then you're going to see one that says board policies that's like a bluish purple color. Well, that one that's the bluish purple color, you'll notice that those policies are all put forward by Thrun Law. Now, those are the same policies that we've found as we look up, that for instance, the 5106 that was filed as a policy violation in Mount Pleasant, that's the same policy that's put forward by the other schools also that have been in potential violation in the complaint, I should say. So you'll notice that Thrun Law puts those forward.
Oh, in this situation, they don't. I mean, they'd be worried about lawsuits, yes, but with your complaint, they also need to be worried about losing funding, maybe.
Right. I don't, and to be frank with you, it's a funny argument, right? It's this isn't really going on very much. Then why are you working so hard to risk your funding to do this? So that you can take away the rights of a small number of women. That's not how the statute reads. It's a civil rights statute. It's been around since 1972, and you must comply. There are about 4 or 5 law firms in the state of Michigan that do policy work.
Yeah.
Thrun is one, Miller Johnson, a couple others. They do what they give their clients options. And unfortunately, in 2023, they wrote a letter saying, "We think the better option is this policy we've written that does exactly what the Biden administration tells us
Yeah,
it
the
does."
Biden administration, but that administration's not in existence anymore.
Correct. And when they wrote the letter this month, it said it's complicated. It didn't say
Really?
the Trump administration, you better do what they say. It said it's complicated. Now I get it. I used to be on a board. I sat on a
Yeah.
board. Board members are generally lay people and they don't like being sued. They don't like being threatened with being sued. But on the other hand, understand there's a new sheriff in town. And that sheriff is the guy that every month comes with a bag of money. And if that money is cut off in Bree's district and Mount Clemens or Mount Pleasant and a bunch of other districts, that's a lot of funding. And you got to ask yourself, am I going to defy the federal government and risk that funding because Thrun Law told me to in 2023?
Yeah, let me ask Bree. You know the district there. So why, when the board members in Mount Pleasant, I don't know any of them, but why are they and other school boards and maybe superintendents, but why are they digging in when the research shows, studies show most parents, and there's some that aren't, but most are on the side of you, I would say, but also the danger of losing funding. Why are they digging in then in risking that?
Without being able to answer for them, I would
Yeah.
never speak for them. I don't actually know that I could understand their logic. But you have to remember that Mount Pleasant is in congressional district 2. And really, our congressional district, for the most part, is red. And there's just a few hot spots that are very liberal. They're very strong with Democrats, and the city of Mount Pleasant happens to be one of those hotspots. So the board has all great intentions when you listen to what they have to say, that they want to include all students, as we should, because I do just want to point out, Dave, this is not about hurting another student's feelings. This is not about saying that somebody is bad because they have gender dysphoria or they're going through a concerning time in their life and they're, having identity motivations that change. That's not what any of this is about. And a lot of the decisions that the Mount Pleasant board makes when you listen to them really revolve around the feelings and the feelings of students and how the students are going to feel. But we have solutions to this, whether it's having the boy girl one stall bathroom that we can have. Actually, and I just looked this up. So Rep. Jamie Green,
Yep.
she's a House representative here in the state of Michigan. She had put together House Bill 4031. And I haven't looked on this recently because honestly, this would be a Matt question because I'm not quite sure if there's any clout that can go to it. But in that bill, she had said, we understand that some students may identify as a female, however, they're males. So the bill would allow them to compete with the females in single competition sports, right? So you're running track, you're running cross country, that type of a thing. But they would be ranked according to their male counterparts. The best example that we can give is Riley Gaines. We all know who Riley Gaines is, right? She had lost to the male competitor. She did just receive that title back. All it took was one male. Gentlemen, it took one male to beat her from her position. We don't need to have, 5% of student athletes to be transgender. It takes one male to steal a woman's title. So again, I can't speak for Mount Pleasant, but I do think they make a lot of decisions based on feelings.
So, Matt, wrapping this up, what is the next step? This has been filed with the Department of Education. And is there an official process? Is Mount Pleasant going to hear from the department, from the feds? Is that how this, what do we know happens next?
The next step is that the Office of Civil Rights reached out to the complainant. I expect that to happen anytime now.
Okay.
And they collect a little bit more information. This is a policy-based complaint. This is not a fact-based. We're not saying person X used the bathroom and person Y was upset by it. It's not that way. This is simply a policy. You have a policy that does not comply with Title IX. You need to fix it. Yeah. And the policy goes beyond what I think people would find rational, and that is that the student can change their gender without the approval of their parents, as an example. The policy specifically calls that out. Wow. And the thing about it is when we talk about this issue, the important thing that is protected by Title IX is the woman's rights. If a boy with gender dysphoria walks in an empty school, does anyone care which bathroom the kid uses? They do not. If there is a single stall bathroom that is multi-gender, does anyone care if the gender dysphoric kid of either sex goes and uses that bathroom? I sure hope not. I sure hope we're beyond that. Yeah. And I've been asked, does Title IX mean that Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act does not exist? It doesn't. That's not true. Can a district fire a teacher for being transgender? They cannot. They cannot under Elliott Larson, and they're not able to under Title IX. Title IX is protecting the rights of young women, and that's the focus. That's what the law was for, and that's what the complaint is about.
Okay, so now we just sit and wait. Would this be something during a board meeting they would have to say, hey, they'd have to put it on an agenda and say, we have been served this letter, this investigation is launched? They'd have to make that public, correct?
That's correct. They would.
And Dave, yeah. So I'll send you over because it does look like they reviewed policy 5106 and they, of course, brought up yours truly. In the meeting, having said that they had realized through the news that a Title IX complaint had been filed, they still, at that time last week, had not received the complaint themselves. They did have discussions, and without going back through the transcript, I did not see a vote on what took place, but there were still a lot of feelings and reserves on changing that policy.
Yeah, this is probably happening at more and more school districts across the state and the country. How are they going to handle your complaint? They're probably getting dozens, if not hundreds of these. Is it going to be handled on a case-by-case basis, or is a court going to say, okay, what's going on in all these states? How are they going to deal with all of this nationally?
Well, they may deal with it summarily, and that would be the most. So they might just say, "We've looked at it. You have this policy in writing. You must affirmatively put a policy in place that complies with Title IX, and if you don't, we're cutting off funding."
So
That's
like
probably the
every
next
every school district in the
every
country.
across the country, because these are going on across the country. To
Yeah,
be
yeah.
clear,
So
that
it would be the Department of Education would do that. Could then a school district say, "No, we're suing you," and take it to a higher court or
that
a
is,
court?
they could, and an occasional district could. I would imagine a district like maybe Ferndale or Ann Arbor
Yeah.
might want to do that, and they might want to say, this is so important to us, we are going to sue because we don't think you have the authority to do that. While they're doing that lawsuit, they might lose their Title One funding. That's a lot of money in Ferndale. It's still a fair amount of money in Ann Arbor, and Ann Arbor's got financial issues in their district.
Yeah.
Would a court go in and say you have to pay during the pendency of the suit? I don't know. And it's not, again, this is not a fact-based complaint. It's not, there's girl X who's kicked off the soccer team because boy came on. It's not that. It's you have a policy. You have a written policy that
Could
violates Title IX. You can't do that.
could that, if they wanted to risk their money and do that, could it end up in the Supreme Court?
It sure could. It
Okay.
sure could.
But yeah, they could do this. So last question, Bree and Matthew. I'll start with Bree. If it gets to that point, what is your feeling among parents and even people maybe on the left and right? This, for some, it's not political, but I think especially in Michigan, there's already a concern with our education system. What is this doing to just the feeling in our state about education? Bree, what are you hearing from people?
Dave, you said it right there. There are people that are on both sides of the fence with this. And what I found, even through work that I did with Moms for Liberty, and I'm going to give you an example. When it came to discussions of sexuality and gender in the classrooms out of sex ed, that was brought forward that said, okay, I have to realize that some parents want that for their kids. They need to realize I don't want my kids to do that without my permission. So, from the school's perspective, if you're going to offer this, can you simply just notify parents and give them an opportunity to opt out? Now, under the Biden administration, I think a lot of these school boards like Mount Pleasant were really empowered to just drive home their agenda and do it despite what other parents had in store for their children. If differences can come together, and I'll use Jamie Green's House bill, for example, there's potential to find a solution. And I'm going to go back to the bathroom usage, making that gender neutral bathroom that anybody can use. But without bringing those to the table, in talking about them, there will be no resolution. And it will be one side's going to be angry or the other side's going to be angry.
Yeah, Matt, there are so many issues in this state with education, test scores going down, Michigan continuing to fall. This does not, it's something the education system in Michigan doesn't need because parents are quickly losing trust. This is just, what's your take on everything? Because
Look,
Michigan, I know parents pulling their kids from public schools left and right.
that's correct. And one of the things we talk about at Get Kids Back to School all the time is the concept of mission creep. Okay. When I was educated, it was a smaller set of things that schools were asked to do. And every decade, we've asked them to do more and more and more. Teachers in specific, we've asked them to do more and more and more. And we've given them less time to do it. And we don't pay them particularly well. So I don't, the issue that they have and where this is going to go is at some point that's going to head back in the other direction. People will say, I want my kids to go to school and I want them to learn to write and read and do math and do science and do history. I don't want you to talk about their mental well-being. I don't want you talking about multiple genders. I don't want you to have to feed them or house them or have health care for them. Those are my job. Your job is to teach them. And that is a very attractive thing to parents. And when parents, an average person, a senior, somebody who's been through the process says, I wonder why test scores are down. I wonder why our kids aren't getting smarter. It's not necessarily because they're bad people. It's because they've been given too much to do and too little time to do it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to keep
Well
up to date.
said.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm going to keep up to date with both of you. Thank you so much for the time and the knowledge. And yeah, keep me updated as soon as you hear a response or something. Just message me, and I'll put an update out there.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Absolutely.